As I've shared, the team here from different institutions across the country are here to learn about partnerships. And so once we do introductions, I have some key questions to kind of guide the discussion. They're aligned to, in a certain way, the partnership effectiveness continuum that you have. But then we'll also have ample time for question and answer. And also, we would appreciate you sharing feedback with us too about what you hear. One of the things, part of the program is very much that we begin, we do a lot of work by immersing people in things and making meaning from that. So right now we're going to immerse you into our district leaders and their perspectives of the program. And as we go through the day and a half, we'll continue to kind of make meaning from that. We'll begin with introductions. I also want to let you know there's one University of Utah, who couldn't be here. And so we are videotaping. This is Lori Westerman, our marketing director. And so I just want to make sure, is that all right? So we'll begin with introductions first with our visitors, and then we'll go into introductions of the panels. And Rachel, I want you to introduce yourself too. So okay, and you can come join us. Okay, hi, Chris.
Hi everyone, Chris Torres. I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University. Do you want us to say anything else? Or?
Well, if there is something that you're curious about with, in terms of what they're to guide some of their responses, that would, if you want to put that on the table, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, as I shared before you got here, I'm really interested in how this partnership sort of developed and what's going on with it. What do you think are the real strengths and some of the challenges you've experienced along the way?
My name is Brian Van Groningen. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Virginia, former teacher and administrator, and I'm serving as the graduate assistant for this group on behalf of UVA. But a personal question is just more so how to have an authentic discussion at the beginning to break the ice, of how you can start that initial conversation of how can we devise a list of benefits, for both sides.
Good morning, I'm John Nash. I'm the department chair and associate professor in educational leadership studies at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. Likewise, I think we're at the very beginning stages of considering how to build partnerships with our local districts, and so interested also in how those opening conversations get brokered.
I'm Karen Sanzo, and I am the facilitator for the NIC that's joining you all today, and I'm a professor at Old Dominion University. I am interested in the types of powerful learning experiences that are course-based as well as clinical that have been informed by the partnership. That's kind of where I am right now.
I'm Davis Clement. I'm a postdoctoral research associate at UCEA, and I'm interested in what everyone else is interested in.
Good morning, thanks for being here. My name is Katie Cunningham. I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina, and we are starting to broker a partnership in particular with one district. So looking for tips for success on that, and what, from your perspective, what are some positive things a university that you would like to hear would bring to a partnership?
Good morning. My name is Terrence Greene. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. I've been at UT for 6 years. Prior to my arrival, we had a 5-year federal grant where we had partnerships in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. But when the grant ended, so did some of the partnerships. But at the same time, we had transitions in our leadership. And so now we're at the phase where we're trying to reestablish some of those partnerships. But the context has changed, right? There are a number of other places where folks can go to get their leadership preparation. They're cheaper, they're faster, no longer have to go to the flagship UT anymore. So we're reimagining ourselves within that context and with new leadership. So, kind of questions.
You stole my burning question for them, but no, I'm Jay Deathbelt. I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University. I was an assistant professor at Portland State University, and much like Terrence just kind of alluded to, is that at Portland State, and what I think is happening in Michigan, is that there are alternative certification programs. So I want to know why this program with DU versus other alternative certifications that you could have partaken in as well.
I'm Tara Chambers. I'm an associate professor also at Michigan State. Yeah, we don't currently have any formal partnerships with any of our area school districts, which is something that we're hoping to change. We're surrounded by lots of districts that we know we could and should partner with. So I guess I'm kind of curious, like, if there are particular things about your relationship with DU that makes it attractive for you to partner, what those kinds of incentives might be, like that pathway as you think about how to put this partnership proposal together.
I'm Walter Valter. I'm one of the clinical assistant professors here at DU. I am working with schools in the partnership, but also I have a research interest in school partnerships, specifically how school and district leaders navigate not just these types of partnerships, but a lot of the emergent partnerships that are occurring with private capital entering and a lot of startups, and so a much more complex navigation of partnerships today. So just want to learn more as well as take part in this.
Good morning, I'm Lou Young, also from the University of Kentucky, and I have a ton of ideas. I guess I would want to hear from you if you could boil down to what does this program do for Denver public schools that you just couldn't live without? If it weren't there, what are you getting out of the program?
Yeah.
If the partnership didn't exist, you'd be at a loss.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Garrity. I'm Chief Human Resources Officer for Denver Public Schools. I'm a longtime DPS educator. And the only times essentially that I have not worked in Denver Public Schools, I worked in teacher education. So really appreciate the notion of what are opportunities for universities and school districts in exploring partnerships together. So excited about the conversation this morning.
Good morning, Suzanne Schara. I'm a instructional superintendent for High School Network of the traditional schools. I was a Ritchie 2, so the second phase of Ritchie coming in. And so I'll be speaking from the perspective of now I'm an adjunct teaching the classes and comparing that to my experience when I was a Ritchie and how that helped to develop and really shape my leadership in the district. And I've been a 20+ year veteran in DPS.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Schara. I'm the Deputy Superintendent in the Denver Public Schools. I'm a very long time DPS person. I graduated from the Denver Public Schools. Got a scholarship to come here, first in my family to go to college on a scholarship here at the University of Denver. So I count my partnership with DU going way back. Started teaching right out of college, and I've been a middle school, high school teacher, elementary school principal, a central office, and then worked on the cabinet for our superintendent for about 8 years.
Good morning again, everyone. Dana Williams. I met most of you, a couple people have come in, but I did not share that I also grew up in the community, went to Denver schools, and then have been in the district for about 20 years, and now serve as a liaison between the university and the district. So I'm very much looking forward to your perspective and feedback to help us as we continue to evolve in the partnership.
And good morning, I'm Michael Royal, and I too graduated from Denver Public School, so kindergarten through graduation. And professionally, I have been assistant principal. I've supervised schools and principals, and most recently, I'd say in the past 5 years, was partnership with DU. We started, well, actually not when we started, when we enhanced our partnership via a grant from the Wallace Foundation. So as I'm sure Susan has shared, when the grant came in, we took a look at where our strengths, and the existing partnership with DU was one of them. And so one of the areas of focus with the grant on principal pipeline development, principal preparation development, was to enhance the existing partnership and actually then expand to other universities. And so from the beginning of the
all the way through, and Dana and I kind of shared the role a little bit throughout the time. And so now we've got one of the strongest partnerships in the country.
We've got more seats up here if you want to.
Yeah.
Come to the
Rachel, you did not introduce yourself.
My name is Rachel Kamkwani, and this is my first year in the doctorate program on educational leadership and policy studies, and I'm a graduate assistant for Dr. Koraj.
And where have you come to us from?
I'm actually from Malawi.
So she's beginning her doctoral program and really and so part of, and we may have a couple others come in. Dr. Walzer is also new to faculty, so these kind of experiences help give perspective to people in our program, as well as to our visitors. And so as I shared, I do have some key questions, but this can be also very organic as we go through. But one of the, and I'm going to keep looking, Tony Smith, an instructional superintendent, also a graduate of the program, will be joining us. There's traffic, and so he's a little bit behind. So I'll keep looking over here because I'm not sure if he can, if the door locked behind me. But when we began this program in 2003, as I said, it was very intentional around building a program to meet the needs of a district, Denver Public Schools. But the vision of this kind of work and the foundation for this co-partnering is very important. So I thought, especially Susanna with the senior leadership, and also Debbie who stepped out, when you're looking at your work as a district leader, what do you want from university programs?
Sure. So I think I have a really unique perspective on this. I, as a teacher in DPS, participated in a leadership development program that we had that was a partnership with DU and the University of Colorado at Denver. And it was in the middle 90s, so in advance of the partnership that we're referencing here. And I think there were some very different characteristics about that program than the way we have envisioned this partnership now. It was a cohort for the Denver Public Schools, but it was mostly the university's program that they provided to people inside the district. And so what was district-based about it was you were sitting with people from your district. That is remarkably different, I would say, in the partnership that we have now, in that it truly is a partnership. It truly is the kind of program that has been developed around what are the values that we think are important for leaders to espouse. How is it that we think leaders should be brought into the field, and how do we use the best of both organizations, the ability of our district to have our finger on the pulse of what we see new leaders need in the field, as well as the strengths of the university in terms of what is the very best cutting edge best practice and research tell us about leadership development. And so I think it's been really important that we've been able to work in collaboration and conjunction over a long period of time. Lots of people asked questions that were sort of around, like, how did it start? What are tips for success? I think you can't ignore the fact that we've had incredibly stable leadership in both organizations over a very long period of time. So our superintendent, who's just now getting ready to step down in a couple of weeks, has been our superintendent for 10 years. This partnership precedes that, but we had very stable leadership even when leaders changed, with a continuation of the same direction of the work. And Susan has been here from the very beginning, and so I think when you think about some of the things that make a big difference, now there have been lots of other people and lots of other places where there have been changes, like the folks in these chairs, the folks in our chairs have changed a lot, but the fact that there has been some real stability in the leadership of both organizations has made a tremendous difference. And so what I would say as advice is, if you're not in a place where you can get that level of stability, you need to figure out, how do you create the kind of sustainable structures that are really in tune with what both the Institute for Higher Education is wanting to provide and what the districts need in terms of the service that you get from them. And so I would say that that's really important. It has created an environment of just incredible collegiality and trust. We have been able over time to really significantly rethink and retool things, sometimes more on our end, frankly, I think, than potentially on the higher ed end. But even on the higher ed end, it's been the kind of relationship where we have been able to think, we just recently moved into a space where we're doing work with turnaround leaders. That was not at all what we sort of envisioned the work as in the beginning. But because of the length of time that we've had in the relationship, it's really easy to start talking about, so what else is it that we can do together? Debbie, we were just talking about what do we want from the university partner. So I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add on.
Apologies about having to step out. But I think actually it's, even though it's bad timing that I had to step out, it's actually a really good example of just the reality of life in a school district. As you all know from, it sounds like a lot of you lived in school districts. And it speaks to the power of the partnership that we have with DU, in that the conversation stays in a place that can be the theoretical and the big picture idea, yet it doesn't only stay there. It can live there, and then it can permeate back into the very real world our school leaders live in, of the urgent, of the crazy, of the back and forth. And so the strength of the partnership is in that DU can provide enough of a separation from the school district context so that people can engage in different types of conversations than you can when you're in the middle of it every day. That gives a safety to our leaders to be able to have some distance. It can add perspective. It can be the place where research and theory can really impact our leaders' thinking. And yet, DU stays close enough that it can, the conversations can stay really grounded. And we know this just happened in one of your schools last week. What does that mean for you as leaders? And in debriefing with a lot of our principals, they talk about that as being one of the most powerful parts of the learning. To get to your point of what's like really unique is that if they go to other places, you don't necessarily have that guarantee that you're going to be able to go back and forth between the daily realities of living and working in the Denver Public Schools with deep research-based theoretical underpinnings for the learning.
And Debbie, actually, I'd like you to also share more broadly than the Ritchie program. A question was raised earlier about teacher work, and Susanna, you too. How does this work connect with other, the teacher ed?
So we have a partnership with DU that goes from pre-service education up through folks getting past the principalship, getting doing their doctoral work here, and so goes across. And what's common in those conversations is the idea of preparing people to help accomplish the mission and vision and goals of the Denver Public Schools. So our focus on equity, our focus on closing the opportunity gap as being core. And then, I think the teacher ed, the changes that we've seen in our partnership around teacher ed are really illustrative of what can happen in a dynamic partnership. So we started years ago with external grant dollars that funded an initiative around a teacher residency program that we shared with DU, and had some great success in that program. Grant dollars went away. The landscape on teacher education has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, and we needed to rethink what the residency program looked like. What could have been a breakup, right? So it could have been the grant dollars have gone, we have different opinions, we're going in different ways, the residency's over. Actually is just, we didn't go the breakup route, we went just the transformation route. And so we worked for a year with Karen here and her team to say, what can DU uniquely provide the Denver Public Schools can't? And then what can the Denver Public Schools provide that DU just can't in its teacher education program? Let's get clear on how, like, what we're best at, we should focus on. And what you're best at, you should focus on. And then our conversations can be at the intersection of those things. And so we launched a new way to partner around teacher education with an urban teacher education program across DU and DPS this year. And I think the partnership feels stronger because of being able to go through that transformation together than what can oftentimes happen when the grant dollars go away. And so I think that speaks to when you have leadership aligned about shared and you have the people directly doing the work then feeling they're empowered to enact on that shared vision, what can be possible.
And just a highlight on sustainability with that, by in the leadership space, we were then able to have teacher ed candidates in schools where Ritchie graduates were leading, and so really connect and knowing what that work was to connect and support those things. As an institution, we still could work much more tightly with our teacher ed department, but there are those, we have that opportunity with the district to do so. And Tony, thank you for joining us. And if you could just introduce yourself and your role.
Yeah. Tony Smith, Instructional Superintendent for 612 Network. Been with them for a long time. I'm one of the old school Ritchie 4. And have gone through the DU program through my doctorate studies as well.
So I'm going to shift it to the joint accountability pieces of the work, this idea of reciprocity. You've heard the vision piece of it, but what are some examples on how the district and university partnership, how it's impacted improvement efforts in the district, what kind of, and also if you have examples of impacting the university, but Michael?
Sure. So I'll reference back to 2011, where, as I mentioned, we had an existing relationship with DU, but at that time, DPS received a substantial grant from the Wallace Foundation, and I think for the district that prompted this idea of how do we improve and take a really close look at our principal talent management systems and what systems can incorporate to put into place. And so one of which was very foundational was our evaluation system and our standards. And so going from DPS, going from a system, evaluation system that was literally satisfactory or unsatisfactory, to really diving in and taking a look at what does it mean to be an effective school leader. And so we spent a lot of time, energy, resources developing what does it mean to be an effective school leader within the Denver Public Schools. And as we unpacked that, we took our partners along with us. And so because the idea is, if this is our idea of an effective school leader, then how do we prepare them, and who prepares them, which is our university partners. And so as we began to craft and revise and spend a lot of energy on what is our definition of an effective school leader, again, we're learning both ways about what the university knows in terms of theory, in terms of how they prepare school leaders, and how they have been, in this particular case, how they have been preparing their Ritchies. And a lot of that information kind of fit into our definition of what is an effective school leader. And as it has evolved over time, because we started at, okay, here's the bar, and then our leaders were prepared and they met that bar, we revised our standards. And as those revisions happened over time, not only that work happening in the Denver Public Schools, but our partners, DU, Susan was right at the table with us. It's crafting their program as well. So Susan's working on her end to design content that then also aligns to this common definition. So we're evolving together. And then another offshoot of our evaluation system was, well then, if this is our definition of an effective school leader, we need to revise and revamp our selection and hiring process. And as we're doing that, we're looking for leaders who are meeting that bar as we're selecting. And again, then that also begs the question of, well then who gets selected into the program? And we're looking for the same competencies. And so our selection criteria at the different public schools, as well as our selection criteria for who is going into the, being selected into the Ritchie program and other programs, those competencies are front and center. And again, it's just a very smooth practice. We're learning from each other. The value-based learning was a key element of, that's almost like this screening of this is who we're looking for to become Ritchies. And so that idea then transfers into, well, that's worked. So we're going to take what's working and incorporate it into what we're designing at the district. So it all just kind of connects together, and I could probably go on and on and on and talk about how we're preparing school leaders, how we're supporting them. But it's all, I guess foundationally, I would say, is we started with a common definition of what it means to be effective, and we've designed everything around those competencies.
I would just add to that, to the core, some of the pieces that I heard of having that trusting relationship that really allows it to be symbiotic, and how, like Susan spoke to, how what was a boutique program through the university became this is how leaders are prepared and developing different cohorts, but also on the district side of having through these conversations, this thought partnership, so that when we are so deep in the weeds in the work of education, having the thought partnership at the university to be able to lift up and out. So we share the partner continuum as a resource that helps us do our work more effectively. Having research in the field that you all awareness, how we have that theoretical piece connected with the practice, connected to the values, being this continuous piece that helps both organizations rise. And the idea, as I shared earlier, that we all want the best leaders in our schools for our students, and how we work together to really make that happen through supporting leaders. What started with Ritchie in preparation, so now our work with the lead team of how we then, as Michael had said, implications for selecting into this program, but then also making sure they're prepared for that first lane of being first year AP. But what are implications for that preparing toward principalship? How do we learn from this partnership to do that work? Really helps us improve.
Can I give just a really concrete example? So like when we first launched the Ritchie program, I think we really thought that out of Ritchie, we were going to create the next generation of school leaders, of principals. Mm-hmm. And what we found was it was actually very few people who moved directly from the Ritchie program right into school leadership, into the principalship. Okay. And it was over time that I think we were able to, in collaboration with each other, realize that we needed to have programs of preparation that really, as you said, like prepared people for, you're stepping out of the classroom into your first experience with leadership. What does that look like? You're at your very first level of, school leadership as an assistant principal or a dean or something like that. What are the right things for you to be engaged in to move up? How do we know when you're close to being ready for the principalship? What does that look like? And then what are the supports for a first year principal? Mm-hmm. And so it's a very different approach to thinking about what that pipeline looks like now than when it was when we launched the Ritchie program, over 15 years ago.
May I just follow up on that just a second?
Yep.
Oh, I can hold it.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, thinking like a superintendent at the executive level, the other thing that seems to me that happens out of what you guys just said is you're building some cachet for having been a Ritchie, and so there's this notion that you've had some solid preparation. But then at the cabinet level, you've got a professional development growth opportunity for your district level leaders built in already, because I'm sure you guys meet together to talk about being cohort instructors, and you're on the cutting edge of what DU has to offer in that regard. That's really powerful. Because a lot of times, you guys are the thoroughbreds and nobody invests in your learning anymore, but this is built in.
Well, and even someone had mentioned mentors, getting feedback from our mentors when we come. Like last week, we brought our mentors to this space, and their gratitude for being able to step back, step away, have some time to connect with one another, to look at some of the theory, to really reflect on their work in developing leaders, to take a breath and then to step back into the work. It's powerful.
That's really
Well, and even sharing a little bit of the pipeline pieces. So it was with this partnership, but then share the other kind of programmatic pieces that have been created.
So sure, I'll start and then you can kind of add on. I think one of the things that as a district, as we're starting to design our pipeline and trying to see where do we start and how do we continue this flow of developing our leaders. We realized we needed to add on more programs, and as those programs are, as Susanna mentioned, as those programs are being developed, so they're going from what does development look like from the first year AP into now I'm transitioning into the principal's roles and those programs. One thing that we learned and that we have stuck with and that we will probably continue to incorporate is this idea of cohort learning. And so that all of our programs have an aspect of cohort, of learning within a cohort, because we are intentional about creating this network of support. And as you hear even Tony say he was a Ritchie 4, that means that there is a group that were also Ritchie 4s, and that's his network of support even today, and that was, I don't know how many years ago, but I'm sure it's
That's a thing.
But we have our secret handshakes.
That was the first one. Yeah. So that means something, and it also, I'll say, and this is a little bit off, but it also adds to this. It's like there's a prestige to be a Ritchie. There's a, gosh, I want that, right? Who doesn't want a group of colleagues that are value-based thinkers, that are really making things happen, that are your friends, your go-to over that length of time? Professionally, that just doesn't happen, and we're seeing it happen, and so that is one thing that is almost a non-negotiable that we incorporate into our programming because we've seen the power of it. And it also, like I said, it's a standard that people aspire to, and there's a prestige around that has happened over time. And I mean, I credit Susan for that because she's been the constant element there and ensuring that happens.
And if I could just jump in, like both Tony and Suzanne were in Ritchie, moved into school leadership, moved out of the district, and moved back in.
Oh.
And so I do think it also has like some stickiness to it in terms of like, you really do feel like you're coming back home because of the support.
Yeah. And I think all of that speaks to those pieces. We can talk about the content and the curriculum, what you have in your syllabus, and there are many structures in the culture and with the cohort and this connectedness and relationships and the retreat and these supports that have influenced how we think about developing leaders across the board. We have now residency for individuals who are moving from assistant principalship to principalship, and that idea they go on a retreat because of the power of what we felt from that experiential learning from Ritchie's. It's fun to see the cohort of individuals who I've worked with in the past few years in Ritchie who are now in that experience in the residency, and so our commitment and work then to make sure that things do spiral and are aligned. And in that space, Chris was talking about the distributed leadership, that this year we launched a fellowship for our teacher leaders who are not interested in going to assistant principal roles and want to strengthen their experience as leaders. How we are using some of these same pieces of that value space, really helping them get in that adaptive space. If you don't always have the answers, that's the important work, influenced by the work and the success we've had with this partnership.
I can come up with a question.
I stepped in and I thought you were going to, so I just wanted to be sure I acknowledged
I was
that.
sort of wondering how, like, we're all thinking about developing some initial partnerships, and at least that's what I'm gathering. And you talked about the reputation. How do you have advice for how to go about starting that? I mean, how did that come? How did folks initially hear, even in the beginning?
It's the quality.
How they get interested in it? You know?
It is the quality. I would say the quality of the leaders that are coming out, but it's definitely, it starts with the experience that they have as Richies. And Dana referenced their, initial retreat is a piece to that, where they are put in a very adaptive and challenging situation, and together they solve problems and they enhance their leadership skills in a way that, and they bond in a way that, connects them. But then once they're on the job, I think they are taking their learnings, and someone mentioned when we were doing introductions, what's the thing that DU has that maybe other districts may not, and it is this idea of value-based learning. They are learning in a way to be adaptive, to know what they value as leaders, who they are as leaders, that type of thing. I actually had my license prior to the Ritchie program startup. My house, you how old I am. But folks have said to me, "Are you a Ritchie?" And I take that as a compliment. I am not. However, I consider myself, because I've had that close proximity to it, to be a value-based leader. And so that's kind of an elusive thing, but it's something to us. And I think that pulls everybody together, so there's a level of very high quality, and people recognize that, and they want to be a part of it.
Can I build off that?
Yeah. Yes.
I think there's also like the things that oftentimes we overlook because we focus on, like the quality of the experience, which is the most important. But there's little things that signal that are also, I think, really important. Senior leader sponsorship. So throughout Ritchie, especially at the beginning, you had top leadership in Denver, actually in the city, and here at DU, being the face of the partnership and saying this is special, this is different, and giving it a degree of importance and status that made it stand out a little bit, of people saying, oh, this is something different, and access. And so in Ritchie, people in Ritchie get an opportunity to meet with the superintendent, get a chance to meet with key leaders across the organization, and in a dialogue, not in a, I'm going to come and lecture, but in a conversation. And that has been consistent throughout the start of Ritchie through to now, that in a really crowded space in leadership development, with super busy people, principals or aspiring principals in a district, something has to stand out to say, this is special. And I think that those side things are really important to honor that and send that message.
One, I don't want to be, I hope this doesn't sound crass. Certainly in the beginning, not everybody got in. And so it was exclusive.
Yeah.
And so don't underestimate the importance of the exclusivity of it to get its status.
Yeah.
And that accountability for results, because it can be fluffy, it can be nice when you talk about the program, about the architecture of the learning organization, and that you need to have the mental models and stuff, and you need to get to the work, but then having looking back and how the leaders show up differently is that piece that people acknowledge. You're like, oh wait, you are Ritchie. Or we're having individuals who are in the program now, and we ask why they're there. Is it because I had a leader who led differently, and they were Ritchie, and that's where I want to be. We've had even in building students, quotes from students saying, like, Miss, you're different than my other principals, and them attributing it to experiences in this program for that legacy and reputation.
I would say also, just to start, sorry to keep going, but there was, in speaking to Susan's idea of exclusivity, it might be hard, like if you've got a really high bar, it may be hard to fill those spots, right? But I would say hold to that and start with a smaller group, because one thing that signals, and it signaled to us as well, is that maybe there's another sort of preparation that needs to happen in order to prepare them for that higher bar. Meaning they're coming out of the classroom, maybe there's we refer to it as bridge, or maybe there's more development that needs to happen before they're actually ready. And so if your group starts out smaller, that might be okay, because you do want to have that high quality applicants coming in so that they're able to then get the quality results that we have. And I think over time, we also recognized as we were selecting assistant principals, hiring managers, principals started to catch on really quick. If you got a Richie, you're going to have a high quality AP, and so they were sought after, not because of status, but because of the quality that could be expected from their work.
And to add on to what Dana just said, I think that we do think we are an exclusive club because we really do all speak the same language. We all have common understandings and common mental models for how we go about, how we all went about really leading our schools. And now Tony and I are leading leaders to lead their schools. So I mean, I think there's a lot of power in that, in the sense that you have a cohort of people that you can turn to and kind of say, I just need to have you as a thought partner as I think through this. But you have so much common ground, it just helps you to build your understanding and to really go to the next level. As Michael said, it is a prize to get a Richie in your building, because you know that that person is coming with solid understandings, solid not only pedagogy but practical knowledge and experience that they can just apply, which is really very powerful, and that's something that I'm going to speak to when it's our turn to speak on this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, I have several now.
Okay.
Firstly, I will say this is the first time I've ever wanted to go back and get my principal license again.
You want to be in the club, don't you?
Yeah, me too. Part which I guess to piggyback off of that comment, when you mentioned exclusive power or exclusivity, I would want to know, what do you offer for those that aren't Richies that want to speak the same language that you all do? That's one question. And then the other question that I had was, I believe Susanna mentioned about the sustainable leadership throughout, even when you do transition. So I just wanted to know, what does that transition look like? Like, what is it that lends itself to stabilizing that consistency regardless of who comes in the mix? And then the other question I think is for Michael? Michael. Yeah, you had said something about you took a look at your screening process again, and I wanted some clarification on at what stage was that? Was it at the teaching stage, or was it before you got teachers, or was it, where do you look for these leaders before you offer the Richie program or they apply?
Yeah.
Those are my three questions.
Okay, I'll try to remember either. But so I'll start with maybe the screening and what happens when they're not accepted into the program, and Dana will help me out. But so I think the work that collectively the university and the district have done over time has really become clear, transparent, and discreet about what are we looking for. So what are those competencies that we have all agreed are competencies that an effective school leader should have, and in this case, an effective assistant principal, because referencing what Susanna talked about is that that's probably their first step into school leadership. And so we're very clear about those competencies, and becoming clear about those competencies allows us to really identify the gaps where they come short. So where we have our extensive, we could talk about that a little more, screening process, we're able to really give targeted feedback around areas for growth. And then that kind of collectively, that feedback, when we see themes, when we see kind of common strands among candidates who are not meeting the bar, it informs our preparation program. So it informs us that, okay, here's where we need to go deeper, and we need to create, in some cases we've created APSN, we've created programs to help kind of bridge this, support those folks, because we are really invested in those people, because they've demonstrated a need, they've demonstrated some skills and competencies, and so our job on our team, Dana and I, is to really help that, enhance that, develop that, encourage that, so that they're at the table applying again next year, because they've got something, they just didn't meet the bar.
And the latest iteration of that school leadership framework actually breaks down in the roles of distributed leadership within a building. So it has the same leadership competencies and what that looks like for leader mothers, what that looks like for a teacher leader. So it helps us kind of backwards map that scaffolding. And it's not uncommon. I will get emails, phone calls of someone who is like a second-year teacher, and they're like, I want to be a principal. And so then having that conversation to help them understand that, especially in our context, we have these scaffolded levels of support. And the next step for them may be that they are an aspiring teacher leader and connecting with the right people for that level of development. And how we work not only with our team, but in the teacher leader team and across our systems of how we support people in a way that makes sense for their spiral development and what they're wanting for their next career steps.
And what are, because there are other ways that the program and university, especially at the beginning, there are some things about the program that are now a part of the fabric of the district, right?
Yeah,
Speak to those.
I will, and then Susanna and Deb probably want to talk to about that. And so that sustainability piece is, and I did my doctorate on sustaining programs, and so here at DU. And so it's this idea that what can we create, design, and incorporate into this that if leadership changes, like it is so of high quality that our end users would not stand for it being taken away, right? And so I've spoken about the work we've done with in the district, our evaluation system. Well, we have standards that are so connected to how people are developed and what they're evaluated on, and it's so tightly aligned that if we were to step back, get a new leader, and say, okay, we're going back to satisfactory or not satisfactory, our school leaders would not stand for that. So that's how ingrained in the system it is. And so that is a sustainability step that we take with everything we do, is of such high quality that if taken away, it wouldn't fly.
Okay.
It's part of who we are. Deb, do you want to talk about just the leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, like, thinking about what are the ways to build the system and not just the experiences are really important. Like, I want to be honest, like, we've had a superintendent for 10 years, right? Susan, how long have you been here? 17 years. Like, I don't want to pretend like that doesn't matter. That really, really matters. And I'm thinking about, like, I was just with colleagues in Baltimore where they've had like 3 chief academic officers in 3 years in Hillsborough. You know, it's like they can barely get something started, much less like deeply ingrained. And so I don't want to pretend like it's easy to do. The way to get the impact is to build it into your systems, for sure. There are enabling conditions that make that easier or make that harder.
Could you speak a little bit about the sustainable structures that seem to transcend time and leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, like, we're in this really fortunate place right now, just given the longevity that we've had in both systems, particularly around this concept of being a values-based leader, where I think if somebody were to come in and say, values-based leadership is fluff, like, we're about results, and, like, that doesn't matter, I think you would see a revolt, and I think you'd see a major drain of talent. So it's not that it couldn't change, but you would not keep the current people in the system. Because people in the system at this point have come to the system. And, you know, we did a lot of work. I would say, like, Debbie, if you were going to guess, how many of the leaders that we have now have been through our leadership programs? It's
through, so we have homegrown over 90% of our principals, and over 80% of our current assistant principals are homegrown.
Yeah, and for the people who weren't homegrown, we've had really intentional leadership development opportunities that are not nearly as extensive as the kind of like sustained program that we're talking about, where you're getting your license or you're in a year-long prep program to become a principal or whatever. But like immersive, cohort-based, values-based experiences
for sitting principals who, you know, or for myself, like I got my license prior to this. I'm not a Ritchie alum, but consider myself very much a values-based leader, and we've created the environment for everybody. And somebody had the question like if you don't get in, how do you learn to speak the language? We really tried to create the kind of pervasive district-wide atmosphere where that is the language we all try to talk. And so if you didn't go through these programs, if you came into the district from outside, there are frequent annual and of greater intensity experiences that leaders can go through to be able to learn what the language is like. I think for new leaders who come into our system from outside, it's very palpable how different it feels. And so a new leader could come in and a new leader could say, we're not going to do any of that, that's a waste of money. They could do that. I think that there would be an enormous drain of talent because the people who are here because of it.
And I think you asked a question like, how does this really permeate into the schools? So there are leaders that potential leaders that I'm working with who are senior team leads, aspiring assistant principals, all of that in our cohort. And so what we tell them is lead where you are. So if you are halftime teacher leader and halftime teacher, we expect you to be really working with the cohort of teachers that you're supporting to really infuse what you're learning to that cohort, because that's how, it's the ripple in the pond, the pebble goes in and it spreads. So we're looking at every person that goes to the program, you're to impact the cohort of people that you most directly work with. And that's how we're spreading, the vision and the work and really the values of being in the Ritchie program. So that is the message that we're giving folks, and really just helping them fine-tune that as they go back into their schools.
One thing I want to point out is you have, in the materials that you have the school leadership framework, which I think is really different from a lot of leadership frameworks within districts, because it gets to that granularity of kind of a continuum of leadership positions, starting with senior team leads. And just to make a note at the beginning of the program, and this ties in with the exclusivity, this was so brand new at the beginning, and as time has happened, new positions have been formed in the district where they're almost getting prepared to come into the program, because there's this continuum that backs before you come into the program. But really getting concrete with districts about what expectations are and building for that, and then communicating back as the opportunity.
And we didn't start with that framework,
right.
So don't think
yes, I know that's what I'm saying.
We didn't start with that. We started with like a school leader framework, principal framework. And I think even in the beginning, it sort of was like what effective looks like. I don't even know if we had like all of the developmental what it looks like if you're not meeting, if you're approaching. So the other thing that I would say is like, don't let something like this feel like where you have to start.
Right.
Start where you start.
Yep.
And then commit to saying, we'll get it better.
Remember, we're 16 years into this, and I think Suzanne and I can both say that when we were Ritchie 2, it wasn't that it was this known entity, and it was like, oh, well, you're one of those.
Right.
Because we were developed to think differently and lead differently and be disruptors to the system, and the system didn't necessarily want that. And even today, there is this culture that is developed throughout the system, and it is this symbiotic relationship, and the work of leading a school is still very hard. And we have, and Suzanne and I will have like these eager, bright, enthusiastic, wanting to change their world leaders, and we'll be here in class on Saturday, and we read all of these things, we get so excited, and we go back, and it's so hard.
Right.
And that's where that cohort piece of them having each other as sounding board through, I mean, we're 15 years later, and we still have the connected support. That it's not all rainbows and unicorns, but that we have the systems and supports.
And maybe go into some of the granularity from those Tony and Suzanne and Dana who were a part of the program and then now are in district leadership. And I just want to highlight, and maybe even Dana and Suzanne and Tony speak about how, especially at the beginning of the program, what that connection with the district was. What was it like to be a little different?
Well, do you want to talk? Because you talk a little
Sure.
bit. Start.
And now, just to make sure, the beginning of the Richie program.
Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy. It was a saturation. Like you were immersed into a different culture. And so as we learned together and we started to form relationships, really translating the work that the theory into the work that we do was hard, but also, we leaned on each other to carry it through. I think the one thing that sets us apart that I will say is that in accordance to our evaluation metrics here in the district, Richies have been successful. I think about my time as a principal, very successful. Suzanne's time as a principal, very successful. So we're building not just a cohort of collaborative souls, but also an accountability to success. You're part of something that really drives change for kids. And in that values-based leadership, we really kind of work that through in the beginning of the program at Emerald Valley Ranch.
Right, in Colorado Springs,
Right.
yeah.
Which I'm kind of sad to see they don't go to anymore.
I know.
Just really quick,
So it's
it was like that boot camp setting, right? No phones.
It was a
like we had-
retreat.
Middle of nowhere, basically. Yeah.
You spend time looking outside or doing work. I mean, 8 to 10 hours of just solid coursework was really important to my development as a leader, and then the camaraderie I built with my cohort really established and rooted those values in what I do. So.
And having been a building leader at a traditional high school, when I left, my assistant principal, I could highly recommend him to be the principal because he had been a Richie. We had worked together lockstep in changing the culture of the school, the vision of the school, and just getting everyone on board to have much more of a growth mindset and to be successful. And it was easy to pass over the reins because I knew he was going to continue the work. There wasn't going to be a quick, about face. And in meeting with them every month, I'm actually supervising that school now. He's saying we're doing exactly what we did together. And that's great to hear because we figured out what worked. We were in lockstep, we had the same language, and we had the same values moving forward. So there's a lot of value in that. It really is.
I will also add, I follow the Richie, and one of the schools that I led, I follow the Richie, have had Richies lead and be really successful. Actually supervised a Richie who was in my cohort, and the work that she does is really, we speak a common language, right? We've been able to move faster because of where we come from and the shared experience that we've had. And I've supervised Richies before, and that same level of accountability and consistency has permeated the work that we do. So it's been really important in creating, to somebody's point, sustainability in the schools, and the consistency of structure and program.
I have a couple questions real quickly. This has all been very helpful and useful, so thank you so much. I have some questions around like the collaborations in terms of kind of what it looks like from both parts. So one, in terms of DU has like the empirical knowledge of what's going on, but as district leaders, you have everyday urgent, crazy problems of practice. What does the collaboration look like with the curriculum, and then how nimble is that curriculum to kind of adjust? So that's one question. And then in terms of the courses, are they all taught by DU faculty, or are they taught by some district leaders? Is it a practitioner, researcher, combination? What does that look like? And then does the district subsidize tuition for students? So essentially the district's making an investment, and then they see this return on investment. Is a question. And then once, I know it's a lot, but just get them all.
I know.
I said I got it. Throw them out. All right. And then what's the postgraduate support look like? Is that something that's collective, or is that something that's the responsibility of the university? So at UT Austin, one of the gaps we have is that we prepare leaders, I think, fairly well, but when they actually get in the role, that support isn't there, and the collective support. So what does that look like? Then my final question is around, has the Ritchie program been able to diversify the leadership in the district so that it's reflective of the students there, the changing demographics? And if so, what does that intentionality look like somewhat practically in recruiting and retaining and so on and so forth?
Okay, I'll answer the one, but
All right.
I'll have to have you repeat it. The one that spoke to like the practicality. I think
Well,
was
the
your
first
third.
one was, I think, the program model and the staffing of the program,
Yeah, and
right?
the nimbleness and
And how we
effective-
adjust
How do we do
to,
curriculum?
how do we
time
adjust
for
to?
it.
What was your third question?
The last one was about the demographic.
No, go back.
Whole support. Was support after they graduated? That was the fourth one.
Right, I'll do the one about who's teaching, I'm trying to put some key words that you said, like, maybe so I can connect to that. So in our cohort, we are all former principals. Dana was a principal, Mimi Diaz was a principal, I was a principal, all within DPS. So we give that context of real life to our interns, which is extremely valuable. So when we're teaching different lessons like around the law, we're able to say, so here's a scenario that really happened as it relates to the law. How would you address this? And those are the types of experiences that we give them. We also are able to bring in experts from the district to fill in their knowledge gaps. So we brought in people from safety and security to kind of give a different perspective. Debbie's come in and talked about some of the HR things that are going on in opportunities. Our superintendent has come in and kind of spoken about his vision and what he's looking for in leaders moving forward. So we're really bringing people in to help them secure their knowledge base, but also other experts to ask questions of. Because you're pretty much in isolation when you're in a building, as we all know. So, coming to our class on, once a month on the Saturday, and then we have discussions and we have journals, so we're sharing different things and people are kind of communicating and collaborating that way, as well as the projects that they're doing that are school-based. And they're all job embedded. So the work that they're doing are things that are practical to principals. And so a great example is the first project is an organizational diagnosis. So you're doing a data snapshot, you're doing a culture snapshot, and you're doing a market, advertising snapshot. How are things marketed in your community about your school? So those are things that real leaders have to do. So, and what I shared with them is this is exactly what I used when I became the principal of Thomas Jefferson High School in Denver. I used that knowledge from coming from the Ritchie, like I've got to do a deep dive. So we give them the tools to do those types of deep dives. The next project they're going to be working on is more around a problem of practice. And so they're using their cohort of teachers that they're working with, and they're figuring out what's something that we're all grappling with, that would be to the betterment of our school, whether it be through our unified improvement plan or something of that effect. And then they kind of work through that using design thinking. So again, we're giving them the practical tools to put right into practice. So nothing is just theory and pedagogy. It's like, and so how are you going to use this? I think that has a lot of power because it's real work that a leader needs to be able to do to navigate the system and to be able to grow their school.
Just to add that those intentional structures, again, in the program are what allow for that responsiveness. So the fact that it is team taught and there's deliberate attention to having individuals who have experience within the context allows us to be responsive in real time, because we know, like Suzanne, I'll talk like this just happened, we need to talk about this in class on Saturday. We also, with them having the job embedded internship, we acknowledge that sometimes they need heightened mentoring from us. And because we are also supporting that clinical, it's not a separate person doing clinical practice, we're able to lean in on mentoring and supporting them as well.
Can you speak to the subsidy, because I think that gets at the
Right.
subsidy.
As far as the
just like release time.
Right. So we,
tuition.
and this is something that also has evolved. We don't have contributions from district for tuition. As far as what's made sense in different times in the evolution of the program, at one point it made sense for them to be released from their classroom position to be a full-time intern for a year. Now that we have distributive systems, we've found that people are having access to leadership and learning in their roles. So we moved away from having that you're ripped from your position, you have to find a job at the end, because they wanted to stay in their learning environment, and they were a team lead with half the time they're out of the classroom, or they're a dean. So we shifted the program to respond to that, and we also thought about the fact that by result of doing that, we also then weren't picking the mentors. So we then equipped ourselves to be able to lean in. If it's a principal who says, look, I have to turn around all of this, how we can support them more so in developing this leader. We also, with them having the job embedded piece, have secured that we have central funding for release time that we started last year. And we refined a bit more this year to make it more intentional and expectation that they have at least one full day a quarter, that they are either leaving their building and going and shadowing a leader systems in another place to bring back to their building to develop their own leadership, or they are released to be able to take deeper ownership of leadership within their own building, but just that support of taking away that classroom duty or their day job so that they can lead.
Can I add one more thing? With the district investment, we also fund a portion of what is now Dana's position. I was in that position previously. And that position is strictly to kind of support, oversee the Richies, but also to collaborate with Susan. So they're looking at data that will inform future changes and initiatives to the program, like that nimbleness of, okay, our everything is so tightly aligned that we can take a look at even evaluation data to tell us where gaps are and where strengths are. So that informs how we need to adapt programming on both ends, right? And so just being able to, I don't know how frequently you all meet now, but being able to have time with just the two of them or other key stakeholders to do that reflective thinking, that is has been a stable position that the district is funding in order to get that investment on such a great partnership.
Absolutely, and being able to be an advocate for them in the system and the close conversations that I have with our talent acquisition team. And so we have, coming up Saturday in October, we have the person who is in charge of the assistant principal pool process is going to come and talk to them. So they have the face and name. By nature of being in the program, they are guaranteed to get a face-to-face interview for the pool process. And so having that continued district support that we, because we know this is tightly coupled with our needs and expectations and rigor as a district, we are going to support you in these additional ways.
Terrence, to address your last question, Richie has been a key component in helping us ensure the diversification of our leadership roles across the district. But it doesn't, that didn't happen randomly. Like that happened with extreme intentionality and speaks to a little bit of the shared vision in leadership from the two organizations at the start. Like that was an explicit part of, we want to grow a different type of leader for Denver Public Schools. And by different type of leader, that included the competencies, a values base, a disruptor, but also the representation of who our kids are. That takes annual effort. Because there's so many parts of the institutions that work against our goal of diversification of the principalship. And so it takes constant looking at who's applying, where they're applying from, who do we then aggressively, proactively go out and say, you haven't yet applied. We think this program would be incredible because we believe in you. Let's talk to you about applying. So it's that, the proactive, who's actually in the pipeline to apply, and the review of applications within, knowing that a shared priority across the organizations is around diverse representation. The actual experiences within Richie, people talk about how it is a culturally responsive learning environment, and so set up to ensure people are successful in, not set up like I think sometimes graduate programs can be set out to push people out, so only the few survive. That's not the way it's designed. Like we, if we're investing in you, we want you to be a leader in the Denver Public Schools, and so we're all in. So I think that's a value at the start with constant re-examination of our effectiveness in hitting it.
Got it. Thank you all.
So I think I have a sense of the resources that DPS kicks in. And I'm sorry if you covered it this morning, Susan, but is there anything that, is there any like tuition remission or anything that happens from DU's side to support this partnership, or how does that work?
So DU as a private university, tuition is very high.
Yeah.
And so every accepted student receives a scholarship of about 50%.
Okay. Specifically into the Richie program, not every student at DU.
That is every student in our department.
Okay.
So that is the DPS cohort, but all of our other, we have a certificate, master's, EDD, and PhD. So all have, and that is, and Dean Riley can speak to that a little bit more tomorrow, but that is what we're able to provide internally.
And then a follow-up. So then you have this Ritchie program that is specific to Denver Public Schools, but then you have these other degree programs that are open to anyone, right? Or can you be not in Denver Public Schools and be a part of the Ritchie program?
Our cohort is just DPS, and we hold firm to that, but there is also a campus cohort that has, people want to be with people from different areas. DU is established, we talked about a little bit this morning, in partnerships with other districts who want to have their district-specific cohort as well. There's a mountain cohort, and people teaching up in mountains.
Okay, that are all part of the Ritchie.
It's that same inquiry projects and having that same, it's just that's kind of that new area of learning of having that essence that makes them all the same and how each are different, being responsive to their context as well.
One of the challenges we have is that we have lots of little districts, right? And we call it an ISD, but it's an intermediate school district, which is right around the East Lansing area, which maybe would be the size of DPS, including Lansing and all. It's 12 different school districts make up that geographic area. And it's kind of similar across the state. So Detroit is a place that would be big enough for us to partner and kind of create that network, but that leadership has not been stable. And we've been trying really hard to create a partnership with them, but we've had some challenges. So there are some structural issues that we need to think through too. But this is, this is creating a lot of food for thought.
Just to,
Yeah,
can I jump on that really quick? Because selfishly, we're interested in these partnerships.
Yeah.
But what strikes me, and as Susan said several times, it just the level of coherence of the district is just so apparent in this work. And so for folks who are looking to partner, but the district is highly incoherent, right? What advice would you have for that? Would you not do that? Would you look for more coherent districts? How would you assess who to partner with from our perspective, where the context is totally different, right?
That was a nice way to say it, highly incoherent.
But remember, this is not what you're seeing now is after
Right.
16 years.
Sure,
So
right.
that wasn't the case at the beginning.
Sure, like we could be having a conversation about academics and like the conversation would be very different and there'd be lots of incoherence in our organization, so I don't want to pretend. And we are where we are, frankly, I think because of the partnership. Like the partnership has made this more coherent. And there have been times when it wasn't super coherent, like we had, how long ago was it when we had like the READY program and the Ritchie program and the, like right at the beginning of the Wallace?
Yeah, about 2011.
About 2011, where we had, like 4 different principal prep programs. Internal, along with this partnership and, different approaches to residencies and, some of them were staffed where it was like, 2 residents and 10 staff people and some of them were like the exact flip-flop opposite and so like it has not always been super coherent. I think there has been a commitment. I'll give our superintendent a lot of credit for being open and willing, steadfast for sure, like committed, like leadership is one of his major signature areas of emphasis. So that has been like super strong and was strong for the superintendent prior to him, so 3 years prior to him, so 13 years. We've had like real major investments in leadership. And he's also been really open and willing to like play both the long game and to change over time. And so like in no way has this program ever fossilized. It has changed and adapted both to infusions of grant funding, loss of grant funding, landscape analysis of what we were getting, changes in, as we added in teacher leadership, what does that mean for the principalship? What does that mean? Principals need to be able to know and do differently if you've got a bunch of teacher leaders who are supervising teams of teachers in your building. It's a very different job. Like we've been willing to engage in that kind of reflection and change.
Yeah, we've actually changed the content of projects when DPS went into a more distributive model, and we knew that now principals were needing to be leader of leaders. That created some different kind of competencies. And so how do we change? One of our projects was very much supporting teachers as standards-based instructors. Well, so much of the teacher leader space was doing that, where we then had to change our content to support these instructional leaders as teachers rather than the principal being in that role. Does that make sense? And so it's through this our communications that we identify things that we need to change content-wise. The overall structures can stay the same.
I mean, if I were going to give advice, thinking about like either a place where you have multiple partners and you have to think about how to do that, or you have a district that is perpetually in some sort of state of change, turmoil, and or crisis, right?
Pretty much our
right
context, yeah.
Just realistically, what I would say is try to figure out like who are the willing partners, and build the coalition through the willing.
Yeah.
As opposed to, like, it has been incredibly beneficial to have sponsorship from the very top of the organization. That's not the only way change happens. And finding the people who are willing to commit and figuring out, like, you know, Suzanne's point, it's like when you're talking to an intern, it's like influence within your scope, right? And like that, if you are really sincerely looking to create partnerships, like figure out like who are the people in HR or in talent development or in, you know, principal leadership in these districts. They have problems. Like there's no doubt that they are looking for better ways to create sustainable pipelines of leaders, because principals are not, this is not low-hanging fruit. It's a hard job. Turnover can be really high. And so figuring out who are the willing and then try to build it that way.
In Lexington, we've been thinking about our major school district, which is Fayette County Public Schools. So, Lou, how many students?
55,000.
55,000. So not tiny, but not huge.
Sure. Right.
And right, so where do you start? And I think it's probably, I've had a fruitful conversation with someone I think it's sort of like a Suzanne or a Tony. She's in the CIA. It's the curriculum instruction and assessment for the high schools. So we're not at the superintendent, but here's someone who's young, willing, and interested, and yes, has problems. And I think that's where we're thinking, that's where our first conversation. So when you think about someone having a conversation with you initially, where does it go for you? Do you think it's just then you start to build small fires around the things that are issues for you?
Yes.
And have that dialogue about how we can be responsive to that?
Yes, that's exactly it. Where's the commonality of needs, and then building a cohort to help support that, you know, but also having those thought partners to help you get to where you need to go.
Yeah.
I mean, really determining what's the desired outcome and what are the steps we're going to take together. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, I'd say it's starting small, getting to agreement on what is the shared problem you're trying to solve for. And then this is a lesson learned, I think, for us, especially in the teacher ed space. What can you uniquely, what's the role you can uniquely play in that? And what's the role you need the other partner to uniquely play in that, and get that named? Because I think oftentimes the problem can feel so big that it just gets a little unwieldy, and then it's solving for so many things and confusion around who actually owns which aspect of it, that then you don't get the executive level sponsorship of it. You don't get to the quality of the experience, because again, it's just trying to tackle too much, and so that would be another lesson learned. Yeah.
And I wouldn't ignore the opportunities that grants can give you. I mean, like this, it creates some space and some breathing room to be able to try to be different in a way that's hard sometimes to carve out of a system. You know, frankly, in incoherent systems, sometimes it's easy to carve it out, because like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So sometimes you actually can get some space that way. It's not always sustainable, but like I do think like the opportunities that we've had to build off of grant funding has really created like major opportunity for us.
Well, I think a lot of these points are resonating with me. And, we have been having conversations about tracking down some grant funding because our challenge is that, although I appreciate the point about, kind of start with a coalition of the willing. I think that might be some fruitful direction for us to think about. But because otherwise, there are districts that we're trying to partner with. Like we just made a strong pitch to Detroit in our master's program, and making modifications to make it work because we want to be part of the solution. Like we believe in the program that we have. We think that we have, a strong program, and we want to be in Detroit. And they ended up going with one of our regional service centers instead to offer like a quick and dirty cheap certification, which was, kind of like we had this conversation like, well, then if they want to go with them, that's fine. We'll take our ball and go home. But it's like, no, we have to keep saying like that. Okay, you made this decision, that's fine, but we still know that we are offering a program that you really need, right? Like that's not going to be the long-term solution to what's happening in Detroit. Like you really need our leadership program. So somewhere we need to find a middle ground, and it's probably grant money to get the, grease the wheels.
Do you have people who are going to your program anyway?
Yeah.
Right.
No, we definitely
I'd
do.
like just to surface those results.
I would say do an analysis quickly, just of where are your graduates?
Mm-hmm.
Where are they going?
Yeah.
And the other thing that just quickly I would propose to Detroit is that it's possible to have multiple partnerships. And kind of what Debbie I think was alluding to is what's your niche? So what can you offer? What problem can you help them solve? Because the group that they went with is probably helping them solve something. Maybe
Absolutely.
it's getting leaders
Yeah.
shortly.
Yeah.
That's solving a need for them, but they have other needs and they can have other partnerships. So
Right.
propose that idea.
Right.
But also take a look, where are your graduates being hired? Because if you can get a small coalition of them and then
Right.
they've got issues,
On
what
board.
can you help them solve?
That's a good point.
And it will grow.
Yeah.
Which goes to Terrence's question too about graduate support, and I know Tony has some. How that strategy of knowing the kind of preparation and helping people connect to that, how might that impact this discussion? What did you do at
It's formal,
MLK?
Formal and informal mentor. So I had Richies, two Richies that both went on to be successful principals in the district. But I think within that, really having a conversation around why we hold these values so clear and why we hold them so tight to our success with students. And so, really reciprocating what I was given, which was somebody believing in my ability to lead and helping me find that pathway to develop it, and saying we need leaders of color in our system that are really strong. And then once I entered the program, seeing a diverse group of people who really are advocates for my success, right? And I think about Dick Worpy and some of the Maureen, who I still talk to today and gives me really sound advice as it relates to just facing the challenges that we face on a daily basis, right? Elevating leadership. So I think the mentorship aspect has been really huge, and to Debbie's point, the sponsorship as well, right? I think that aspect has really helped other people to see, like, this person is moving and he's doing great things for kids, and so we want to help other individuals who are about that work, right, to get into a situation where they can improve outcomes for kids. Does that answer your question, Susan?
Well, yeah, I think that when the program first began, there was a lot of pushback, and so it didn't, and that's okay. When you're starting something new, to not be afraid of that. That means that something is happening.
Right.
But then committing to and following and supporting those people to build up these networks, then you get these examples that then, and we talk about, Suzanne mentioned the ripples. That actually was an analogy that we used at the very beginning of the program, that these ripples of change we did have support from top level, but superintendent, not all cabinet level at that time. And so we had this kind of initial green light, but then we had to build cases of support around what people were actually doing to then build from. And, you know, in the hiring of people like the program. And so it's identifying kind of what does make it unique and leveraging that to, yeah.
And I think we're able to really support people when they're looking for this type of a leader. We're able to make recommendations and say, oh, this person's really a systems thinker, this person is this and that. So we're really we are able to help fill those niches that leaders need when it comes to assistant principals. I was able to do that with one of my former schools, with one of the Richies in our cohort last year, and she's very successful now. And I was able to say, she's a Richie, she comes in with A, B, and C. I know these are the things you guys are working with, because it was one of my schools that I directly supported. So I think, to Tony's point, we're able to not only help people get into their next stage jobs, but to mentor them, to help them to be successful, because that really is the work of the program. We're trying to continue to bring people in, help them be successful, and then bring in the next wave and do the same thing. So we're all trying to help the next person get to where they need to be.
I think also it speaks to impact, right? So every Richie that I've had the same conversation. Like, look, this is on-the-job training, and you need to be able to bring to your potential next role evidence of impact. And so let's build that body of evidence now. And it's been really a key piece for Richies to walk in and say, I've done this as an intern. I will continue to do this as an assistant principal, and have experiences to lean back on that are more than at the academic level, they are experiential.
Which gets to the program piece of it, that in the program they do things to provide evidence of impact, right? Tony, is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the connection that you're helping them, but then you're also building out how you're different.
Yeah.
I think about the organizational diagnosis has been conducted in schools that I've been a part of every year by Richie. Like, tell me something new about my school, which has helped me to stay current within my culture and to keep the curriculum relevant to what we're currently doing, but also has given different perspectives and change in context. And so it's been super helpful to hear the ideas of new Richies coming into the program and helping us stay innovative.
And Tara, to your point, you know, as you're trying to break into the Detroit schools, you really have to set your program apart. What are you offering that the other quick fix programs are not offering?
Yes.
And I think that's something that we kind of talked about last spring. How does DU Richie set itself aside from a lot of these other programs? And it really is that it's job embedded here. And not everyone is doing that, and it's not just job embedded, it's practical job embedded that's going to help you really move your school and really grow you as a leader. So think about what those experiences are that you all can offer and provide through the school district. And then what are you telling them the end goal is for you as an individual if you go into this program?
That's good.
Well, and just to build off that, and Lou, you could probably speak to this from your previous life. In districts, we get what feels like a pitch all the time. From every university around and 6 different people within the university, and then every private program, corporate program, all the time. And so it does just feel a little bit like what they're looking for is our people and our money. What they're not looking for is actually to partner with us to co-design a solution together. And so with just like the difference in saying we've got a package already built that's great to solve versus how do we flex the package we've already built to uniquely solve your set of problems you most want to solve. Like just on the response, that feels and lands really different to a district than the we've got your answer, here it is.
So what percentage of your demand for leaders is Richie meeting now? And where else are you drawing from? To what extent are you, or does it benefit you to go out and cultivate other partnerships to meet other needs, you know, as you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're in a really different place as an organization now than we were when Richie started, or even 5 years ago. We have the highest problem now. We have the highest rate of principal retention that we've ever had. That's great.
2
2
years
years
young
ago?
principals.
Yes.
So it's really great, because if we didn't, it'd be a big problem.
But like 2 years ago, you know, Dana can attest to, when I went to speak to the Richies, that was a high degree of upset in the room. Because it was like, wait, you said you're investing in me, I'm investing in myself, where's my job? There are too few jobs available for me. And our response to be, have some patience. Careers are long. You will have opportunities. We're committed to that. It may not just be today. Is a really hard message to hear for a lot of our folks. So we're actually at the point of, we have a really deep bench of strong, diverse, home-built leaders. That a large percentage of them are Ritchie, but not all of them are from Ritchie. We have partnerships with CU Denver, for example, that several people come from. So that has put some constraints and has had to actually flip our conversations a little bit. Suzanne's point of lead where you are has become, I think, a much bigger message than we're going to accelerate you because we have principal vacancies next year that we need you to fill. And so the program has shifted some, our language has shifted some.
So just in terms of numbers, we have 165 district managed schools. We had 22 vacancies this last year. Half of them were filled by people who were already principal residents in those buildings. So they were open, but not really.
And probably half of those were former Ritchies.
Half of those at least were former Ritchies. The other half we filled with people internally in all except one. We have one external hire into the district at this point.
And I was just asked this question, so it was actually 75% right on the button. Yeah, that were internal. That were from our program.
This crew knows that,
That were
but
from the
that
program, but
really kind of gives
more
me
than that.
DP, old
Yes.
superintendent cold chills, because there
Sure.
aren't other urban districts
That can say
who
that.
have a deep bench.
So
They
we have
have
the
just
wrong
the
problem. We're
opposite
losing
problem.
people, particularly secondary people. We have almost no jobs in secondary. So we're losing really competent secondary people to other districts because we just don't have jobs.
Our big district is Jefferson County. They posted 25 leadership vacancies last week.
Yeah.
Wow. So you guys are developing other people's principles.
Well, we're trying to keep them.
Well, and it shifts the conversation, and we're in that recruitment season, and we were just putting together language that we're not leading with, this is about getting your principal license. We're leading with, this is about developing you as a leader. And you may lead as a teacher, leader, and dean. You may lead central office. You may be like Suzanne and Tony and lead in another district and come back. Because we have had, even in my 4 years of taking leadership in the partnership, we have had 3 people who finished the program and went directly to be a principal in other districts. And they still stay connected. We've also had several people who were in the program 4 years ago who are now those first-year principals or now residents getting ready to be principals. So it is a different conversation and changing their mental model of how this works.
So you don't have a contract with them that they have to stay in the district for
No.
X number?
No, but they don't get the tuition dollars. They get my support and they get institutional support that they can.
We have in the past, like, had agreements when we paid for
kind of
tuition.
coercive,
Yeah, right. But we're not paying for it.
Yeah.
But I will say, when I was outside of the district, as they bring up.
They're not going
We
both were. I know. Prodigal children.
Outside of the district, I did sponsor individuals who were not part of Denver Public Schools Ritchie program, but a part of the DU Ritchie system, and they would say through L's and pseudo Ritchie cohorts. I will say the defining factor has been the culture that you set up. Being a values-based leader is difficult in a system that's not values-based, right? And so what I've seen is leaders go into a system and then very quickly yearn to come back where people speak a common language. I know it was true for me. I'm not sure about Suzanne, but I know as you send people out into the world to go achieve great things, they call you and they say, these people are crazy. And, you really, mentor and sponsor them around the values that we develop collectively, right? Think about your leading for kids and heart. And where are you trying to go with this and trying to create change where they are, which isn't always easy. And coming back, it was, again, a very easing feeling to know that I can pick up where I left off in the sense of we share the same values, we share the same experiences and we are speaking pseudo the same language, now we can get into the work of supporting leaders and supporting kids and making change.
One other thing I wanted to add that was an interesting outcome the past couple of years with us making that shift to it being about the leadership development, that we also, was mentioned as far as alternative license and such, that we also as a district are an alternative provider. And so if people meet the competency, they can have an alternative license for the district. And we had an individual last year, as well as we have someone this year, who were selected for an assistant principal position. So they don't have to have a traditional program, but they made the conscious decision that they still wanted to go through Ritchie because they wanted that development for themselves. So it truly was not at all about the license for them, that they want that development, which speaks to the power of the work.
Right, we had 2 last year.
Yeah, we had 2 last year and we had 1 this year.
And I don't know if my DPS colleagues can do this or not, but I want to go back to what Debbie had said about they get pitches from organizations all the time. Can you provide any kind of operational description to what the work is like between the institution? If we're not pitching a program, what is it that we're doing? Can you understand what I'm saying? What does that look like?
So I think the question is, how do you do this work and not come across like a vendor?
Yeah, right. Where would you begin? What is it? How would you start the conversation?
So I think always it's easier to start with a relationship. So before you're even talking about what the work could be, I would start with like build relationships. And so my guess is, like in the same way that Dana's saying, there are people in all of these school districts that you're talking about who are coming to you on their own, right? And it's sort of ad hoc and they're in some sort of program that's not a cohort based and not designed to the school. So there are people in the school districts who are coming to your institutions already. And starting from the place of like, hey, we know we've got your employees in our programs. We want to be a better partner to you on the people who are already here before you're even talking about, let's design and build something together, I think goes a long way in terms of what you are honestly saying you can provide and offer in terms of, increased supports for the people who are already there on their own, who want to go back into that same district and could benefit from greater collaboration across the 2 institutions. So like relationships where the stakes are really low, to me feels like, then it doesn't feel like it's a pitch, it doesn't feel like you're trying to get funding, it doesn't feel like, you're coming in with an answer and you haven't asked me what my question is, right?
So a listening relationship building.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
I think there's just like, partnerships are as complex as any other individual relationship, right? And so this idea of, like even for a district that is feeling in crisis or trauma, they're really good at something. And maybe it's just actually in getting schools running every day, even given the fact that it's been chaos for them for a long time. And so, like starting from that, like you're really good at that. How'd you do that? How can we then help you replicate that in another space? Because you figure like you've got leaders in these organizations who are constantly being judged, constantly feeling that they're not getting the job done.
Someone's gonna fix you.
Someone's there to fix you. And it just builds up a wall and a set of barriers that just feels like, no thanks, nobody else gets what it's like to walk this walk. So we're just gonna close the door and it's just gonna be those of us in the walk. And so how from that stance of empathy, and of, really this listening approach of service, yeah.
Yeah, which I think causes us to examine our motives when we have those conversations long before we make that first call or knock at the door, to make sure it is genuine from that place of empathy.
Any other questions?
I just have a question. When you guys selected value-based learning, can you tell me a little bit about how that came about? I don't remember if you said it, but when you first started this program, how did you get to value-based learning is for you all?
So you're turning to
You're
me.
the beginning, yeah.
Well, it was at the beginning of the design that this team of myself, Maureen Sanders, and Dick Werpy both were mentioned. And working with the district, understanding the district's needs and what kind of leader that they wanted. So they wanted a leader who was going to challenge the status quo. And so we came together as a team, district and university, and identified what those values were. If we were going to have that type of a leader, what were those values? So things around an action orientation, so it wasn't going to be all theoretical. Things around head, hand, and heart. Inspired leader, and we operationalize them together. And so from the beginning of the program, we've done this is one of those kind of concrete things that happens every year that has sustained time, is we operationalize those values. So what do they look like? And the values have shifted a little bit to the changing needs. They're always kind of open. But knowing that as a leader, it's not just doing technical managing work, but there is a heart and soul of leadership. So giving some definition to that. I don't know, does that make
No, that explains how you started.
Yeah, and so the values were part of the frame, the standards were a part of the frame, and then we also had part of the frame being these norms of collaboration in terms of how we will work together, and then we had this reflective process that became kind of the core elements of it. And the district had since, when did the values?
First values day was
5 years ago?
6 years ago. 6 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So the district now has values that are definitely comparable to the program values, but that's their base that then we integrate with.
What can you, oh, go ahead.
No, you go, John.
With the values framework that was created, those are then imparted to the program participants. Do you also have them go through a process that they might reveal their own values as well?
Yeah, and I think that's central, that we start even very beginning of the importance of understanding and being able to articulate what is it that drives you to do this work? What are your core values? Both, because you tell them that when things get tough in the work, as it will, it's because something's pushing against your values. And your values are what you hold on to get you through those difficult times. And in a practical, in the job search piece, I remember a conversation 5 years ago with our assistant superintendent at the time of elementary ed saying, I need people to show up knowing who they are as a leader. We started that creation by them really starting with their values so they could articulate what drives them as a leader, and that being part of our work of how they show up and how they lead from their values, articulating that to their staff, to their community, to their supervisors, while also articulating those connections to the shared values of the district. Being driven in our conversations, the shared values that we have in the program, and those shared values then have gone on to, those are also the shared values in the MA and in the doc programs, and work that he's done, Michael's done, that I've done here at the university, being able to have that spiral is powerful as well, knowing that those are not just espoused values, they're really driving our work, and we do revisit them every year.
And maybe share what we've heard from people coming in the program about the kind of leader that's been kind of referenced.
Well, and that's, I can't remember when in the morning it referenced that we'll have participants apply for the program, both because of the reputation, but that they were struck by a leader that they have served under who led differently, and they led from their values, and that resonated with them, and that's why they were drawn to this program, because they saw those values lived, and they want to be a values-driven leader, and they backwards mapped that Richie was where that started.
Do you help, just quick follow-up, yeah. But do you help the students then sort of operationalize this through the project work? I mean, I know it's challenging to remember that you actually have values, I mean, and so I know they can play a role, so I'm just curious, does that get?
Absolutely, and that's where
How does
it's
that stay
very
alive?
unique in the inquiry projects, that they're intentionally mapped for what's happening in the school through the year. And so there is that action orientation that they are leading within their realm of influence and actively involved in the work, informed by the theory, but always having that values piece in there. And so I think, bless you, of almost like this three-legged stool, that everything they're doing, so that it doesn't just stay in the technical doing the work. What is your mental model? What are your values? What shifts need to happen?
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's that reflective piece that Susan referenced, that we joke around at times that they reflect on the reflections, but really trying to establish that discipline, because we all know when you get in the work, it's so hard to take that time to reflect. So getting them in that habit and having, I would say both on the district side, us continuing to provide after they finish the program, times to step back and have that reflection space, like I referenced with the mentors, but also with the alumni having at least once a year that we have opportunities to come back together and have that regrounding in that value space.
I was in the presentations of learning for our principal residents at the end of last year. And so the person who I'm thinking about, she actually is now serving as an interim principal shortly after her presentation of learning. Her principal left the district, and so we tapped her to be the interim at a middle school. And her presentation of learning was just, like I wish we had folks here who could do little snippets of that for you, because it's this wonderful mix of like who they are genuinely as a person, what motivates them, what their project and the actions were. So it's like, it is this really great combination of, it's not fluff. It really is like, here's who I am, here's what motivates me, here's what I care about, and why I'm so invested in the outcomes of students in my school in this project that I led. And with really like hard data and graphs and charts of outcomes, but really grounded in like I'm not gonna budge it, like in this school or in any other school, because I know what is important to me now, and I know how to lead for what's important to me. And I know how to, in tough times, go back into like what motivates me to take a stand, what motivates me to say it's not okay to lower expectations, or it's not okay to take this time off, or whatever it is. Because I know my values as a leader say the most important thing that I can be doing is leveling the playing field for kids who only get that at school. And then you can like have hard conversations with people without it being about like, you're a bad person. No, it's just like, this is my value. I am the leader here, and I can't compromise on this value.
I guess that goes back to an earlier question I had, and maybe this speaks to the disconnect between some of the partnerships that we had and where they currently are. But how do you support candidates in your program where they have sponsoring or mentoring principals who, in rhetoric, agree with ideals of equity and anti-racism and social justice? But when it's time for students in the program to do projects that actually push toward that, they become very resistant to that. And so I guess one, how do you support leaders throughout that? So we often find our leaders somewhat navigating that space and sometimes truncating what they originally wanted to do. And so like, how do you support that? That's one. And then two, going back, I guess, Susan, the question you asked, and I think, Dana, you kind of answered it somewhat, but like, how do you integrate the technical, but also the equity, social justice framing, right? Because both extremes alone are dangerous. So like, if you're just technical, the technical will almost guarantee you're going to reinforce the status quo and what's been there. But if all you can do is frame and think about equity, but you don't have, like, you still need to know how to do a budget, right? But you do a budget through a lens of equity. So like, so how do you
You gotta
see
bring
the
people with you
integration?
and get buy-in to what you're gonna actually do, yeah.
So what does that look like, that integration between the two? And then how do you support the students in the program when their teacher, the principal is not as supportive?
So I'll answer this with an example. Last night I had a conference call with one of my interns. he's at a very successful elementary school. And he said, you know, as part of the project that we're doing now, they have to do a problem of practice. And he said, you know, we really don't do data teams. We really don't put that much weight in the UIP because we're a successful school, period. But he said, you know, when I dig deep and did my organizational diagnosis, brown and black kids are not succeeding in my school as they are challenges within our district. So he said, I really want to speak to that. How do I do that without offending my principal? And the way the program is set up and the kinds of questions that we ask people, at some point in your diagnosis, it's what would you do as a leader? So I said, that's how you're going to frame your work. You're going to be very factual about this is the data. And these are the things that we are doing. These are the things we're not doing. As a leader, I would do A, B, and C and really flush that out. And I said, so when you're presenting it to your principal, because I'll be there, we do this 4 times a year that we go and have a conference with the principal and the intern. I said, you're going to frame it through that lens when you share it with him. So you're kind of backdooring what he needs to hear and what he knows. But you're going to say, as a leader, this is how I would do it. And I said, you never know, that could spark something in him to say, you're right. Why don't we put more emphasis on this? Even though that was not his priority as the building leader, you have to kind of infuse these things through a back door. So that was my recommendation to him because he was really concerned. He said, you know, we're not really doing the work connected to the UIP because we're really successful and people kind of do what they need to do. And, you know, sometimes in spite of, kids are really successful and do well. But how do you get to the crux of what you know your problem of practice is if you are honest with yourself? And he's a very reflective leader, you know who I'm talking about. He was a very reflective leader and he said, I can't just not talk about this. And I said, good for you. So this is how you're going to do it.
And it's quick before you go, Dana. I know that you know we may need to have people leave, and I just want to thank Susanna. People can stay, but I don't know if you want to. And we have lunch here too. Anyone who wants to stay. So I'm sorry, Dana.
Just that nuanced stance. A lot of times they are novice leaders. They are very excited. They want to go in and change everything. Having the kind of counsel to be able to talk through how politically you can phrase things and make some changes, how you can have impact where you are.
So we were supposed to talk to her.
And also the time
to get done, so she's on it.
That and tell them that there are some things that you will just need to have your little secret page that you have things that I will do differently as a leader, and some things just have to rest there because you're not the principal yet. And so how to lead through influence when you're not in that seat. Thank you.
So I think specifically to your question, I think it's a really interesting one. As you have the language of equity become more of a buzzword, similar to differentiation, scaffolding, all the things that we say. And so I think what Richie has helped us do is to first off identify who we are authentically and how you lead for that, whether it be a hard stance or leading people down a continuum of equity. And I think about the way in my network, which is I've traditionally just worked in turnaround schools, high minority populations. Now I'm in more affluent schools that the word equity is the assimilator, right? We have a shared equity. And so really being able to ask those questions that put people in a position to highlight what they are doing and making it okay for you not to know, right? And I think that some of those values that we got in Richie were really helpful and instrumental in that. But I think what we've tried to do in my network, and I have a few Richies in my network, is really try and change the conversation from every kid succeeds to each kid succeeds, because I think as a system of education we hide our inequities into every, which I think is demonstrated by our SPF and our UIPs and our evaluation metrics. And so Suzanne and I talk about the granularity of the work and how do you get down to a granular level to face these inequities head on with support. Because nobody wants to look up and say like, oh my God, my bias has promoted institutional racism. And then for us to understand that institutional racism starts at the policy level. And so how are you examining your practices and asking those really pointed questions to say, are you really doing this in a technical manner, an adaptive manner? How are you leading for change? And what is the status quo going to yield for these kids you say you care so much about? And you know, I think to quote Dick Worthy, it's the velvet hammer, right? Right. We just keep beating them in the wherever that hurts the most with the velvet hammer to say you have to change this. And to the point of values-based leadership, at some point you're gonna make a decision that I either can or can't do this work. And as an instructional superintendent, it's beholden on me to hold you accountable. Then also to say, like, now this is your window for exit or this is your window for change. And that level of support that I get from my colleagues, from the program, and from people above me has really been helpful in operationalizing equity, which is difficult because it is the new, it's the new hotness, right? I tell everybody, don't tell me equity, show me equity.
Right.
And that's proven to be a hard conversation within an organization that is going through shifts and evolutions.
And I have to tell you that, you know, we teach once a month and we plan and talk about what we're going to do. I can't tell you how often when I'm having conversations, I'm like, oh my God, that's something I did in Richie. Because I mean, I'm just doing it because it's become a part of who I am. And that's kind of how I lead when I'm supporting other leaders. Like, I need you to have more, you know, more inquiry when you're asking about these different things. And then what does it look like for you to advocate for these different things? You know, pushing, but pushing in a way that's more exploratory and having people have a say at the table so that you can kind of find out where they're coming from as you're moving them. So I think what Tony said, the beauty of the program, it's given us not only the skill set, but the tools and the confidence to have these types of conversations and to move and to do the work that we're doing.
I'd also say we're talking downward. We push pretty hard upward.
Yeah.
So Susanna can speak to it, Debbie Garrity can speak to conversations we've had individually as to our quest for equity. What changes? How are we going to operationalize this? What hard stances are we going to take? And from the work that we've done in Richie, again, that value base, I'd be lying to myself if I didn't advocate for these changes or for these shifts or for us to really think strategically about these initiatives and how they impact the least among us as well as the most among us. So I think that's really been important. We push hard from our level, and we've been empowered to do that, partially because of our success as Richie's, partially because of our position, but mostly because I know Suzanne's going to say, yep, absolutely. And, you know, Michael and Dana and other people as well, yep, this is where we have to go. So it's been helpful.
And I think really helping people get to the essence of who they are through their values. I think that's huge. And, you know, we don't often talk about that, but you really have to explore who you are as for how you're going to lead. And that's how you show up every day. And that's a conversation that I have with my interns. You've got to be grounded in who you are and how you project yourself to the world, because that's exactly what's going to be out there.
And I just want to highlight something that Suzanne said too in reference to this when she was talking about the work that she was doing with a current student, in that it's by giving people the tools to gather the data and then having those conversations about these are the data, this is what I see, because we have people gathering also kind of the qualitative data around things. That then becomes then a place to have a conversation from that's not pushing forward an agenda.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the things that at the basis of this inquiry project is that for them to understand how to build evidence-based cases for advocacy and things like that. Any other questions, comments? You've got to run. Thank you so much for coming.